Okay, well, welcome everyone, and welcome to another conversation on Thursday as we have them here on a product of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at California State University, Fresno, part of the Portuguese Oral History Project, and part of the vision of President Joseph Castro and First Lady Mary Castro, which is to make Fresno State the hub for all that is Portuguese related to our community, especially in the academic realm, for the Valley and actually for the West Coast of the United States of America. We're very excited about our conversation today because I've known this young lady for probably for almost all of her life because I knew her parents. And still know her mom is still alive. Her dad unfortunately passed for such a long time. And these conversations are obviously about the Portuguese radio, and Portuguese radio in California is celebrating 100 years. So it was indeed on June the 10th. I always like to remind everyone of that, June the 10th of 1920, that a young man then by the name of José Vitorino, also from the island of Terceira, started a program called Vasco da Gama in honor of one of Portugal's most famous navigators that discovered the sea route to India. And José Vitorino had a couple of unique things. First of all, it's the first radio program in California, but not just in California. It's actually the first Portuguese radio program in the United States, in North America, and probably throughout the world, because this was 3 years before radio began in Portugal, and this was 9 years before the first radio experiments in the Azores as well, and also a few years before radio began in Brazil. So all likely it was a Terceira native that immigrated to California at the beginning of the 20th century that began the first Portuguese radio adventure. And we always like to add that he was illiterate. He did not know how to speak, read, or write, but he knew how to speak, and he knew how to carry on a conversation and get people enthused about. He had a radio program for many years in the Stockton, Modesto area, and eventually he began one in Visalia as well with a partner there that was already in the 1930s. Our guest is Dr. Linda Carvalho Cooley, and she is a communications professor at Reedley College and also a lecturer in the communications department at California State University, Fresno. Linda, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure having you here. Of course, it's kind of ironic that we're talking about radio, that we're talking about your parents' involvement in radio as pioneers, especially after the volcano Capelinhos immigration that last exodus from the islands of the Azores, 60s and 70s, because you are a communications professor and your dad was a communicator par excellence. So let's talk a little bit about that. Your dad, António Carvalho, or Anthony Carvalho, was born from in Terceira. So, but I'd like you to give a little bit of a biographical data, if you don't mind, on your dad and how he came over. And of course, I believe he met your mom here. Correct me if I'm wrong. And tell me a little bit about their personal story before we start about the radio, if you don't mind.
Sure. So my father did immigrate. Actually, he went to Canada first.
Mm-hmm.
He had immigrated to Canada and was living in Toronto for a few years. His sister and his brother-in-law had moved there, and then the sister called them over, and he lived in Canada for a short period of time. But he had two uncles, and his father as well, had actually all come to California, and they farmed, and my grandfather decided to go back home. So he went back to Terceira, but his two brothers stayed in the Tranquility area. So my dad in Canada decided to come visit his uncles in California. And he wasn't real crazy about snow, by the way. So Canada, I think that was one of his good reasons for wanting to leave Canada, right, was the snow. So he came to Tranquility and was visiting with his uncle, Tia Antoine and Tia Francisque. And together with some friends, they decided to go for a road trip. They were going to go to a Portuguese festa. And they were supposed to go to Tulare, but they ended up in Hanford, and that's where he met my mom.
Ah, interesting.
So he met my mom.
Your mom is a native of Hanford then?
She was born in Hanford. A lot of people are surprised by that. Her father is from Cinco Vedras in Terceira. Mm-hmm. Her mother was actually born in the States too, also from Hanford, but her parents were from Jami and from the Praia da Victoria. So all back in Terceira. So all arrows point back to the island, right? But they met at some Portuguese dance in Hanford and danced and exchanged information. And he kept coming back to Hanford to visit with her, and they decided to get married. They got married, and he wanted to stay here with her. So they got a little piece of land behind my grandfather's dairy, and they built a little house. And he started working as a mechanic, and then began the radio program.
And of course the rest is history, but let's talk about that. So give us a little bit of history. When did he begin his first program, which I believe it was called Portugal Terra de Fé?
Portugal Terra de Fé.
Yeah. So kind of for those who don't speak Portuguese, Portugal, land of faith, which, very involved with the Catholicism, which is a huge part of the culture. So tell us a little bit how, from what you know, and I know when he began the program, please.
Well, he actually started the program in 1964, and this is where I'm going to really date myself because that was the year I was born. So Portuguese radio has been a part of my entire life. He started the program in February of 1964, and he had the program for 31 years. And then due to his health, he handed it over to my brother, and my brother took it over, and he actually ran it for about 17 years. So altogether, Portugal Terra de Fé was on the radio for 48 years.
Wow.
And my father, I think, I've been thinking a lot about this since you asked me to come and talk. I know that it's not a radio program like we think of American radio programs. It's not about just playing music and advertisement. It's a lot about the culture and the community and the history. And it's a lot about connecting. And I think that, and I think you've had mentioned this before in some of your other broadcasts, but you used to get a newspaper, once a year?
Yeah.
from the Azores. And I think my father enjoyed being able to share news with people here. As with all immigrants, we tend to cluster in pockets. So whether people came from Italy or Poland or Ireland or the Azores, it's because a friend went somewhere or a relative, and so then they end up kind of clustering in pockets. And so the Tulare area, Hanford area, had a large congregation of Portuguese immigrants. My father was one of them, and my father struggled with the immigration process. He was married to an American citizen. They would check on them regularly to make sure he didn't just get married to stay in this country.
Wow, interesting.
I guess after 52 years, that wasn't the reason. But they did like regular checks to make sure he was still married.
Wow.
And as a matter of fact, the last visit, my dad used to tell the story that the last visit that the immigration made at his house, he told them that my brother was born. So that was a good 2 years into the marriage. So I think they felt like they said, okay, and then they didn't bother him. So I think after what he went through, I think that he became someone that people could ask questions of. And so he was working as a mechanic at a car. Well, he started at a gas station, but he ended up like at the local Chevrolet garage. And people would come to buy a car, and he could speak the language, so the salesman would go get my dad. And so finally the boss said, why aren't you selling the car? Because you're the one doing all the translating. And immigrants feel more comfortable with people who are connected. And our culture specifically, Portuguese people very much like to find the connection. You meet someone Portuguese, you're like, what island are you from? Or where are you from? And,
right.
And do you know this person? And they like to know the connection. And my father realized that this was a network that needed some extra assistance. And so he got the radio program going, and he was the person people sought out for all kinds of things.
Sure.
I mean,
yeah.
Some of the stories are, yeah.
Well, so he started in 1964. And as you said, there is, of course, the personal connections are very important. We arrived in 1968, and I tell the story all the time that we also had connection with another Portuguese radio icon that you and your family know well, and especially your mom and dad, and that is the Morrisons. Both of them have passed, Joaquin and Amelia Morrison.
Amelia, yeah.
They were good friends with your parents, and in 1968 when we arrived, I think about 3 weeks after we were here, my dad purchased a car from your father because he not only was one of the few, I think probably one of the very few that spoke Portuguese at that time. Later on, there were others that got into the car business, myself included, when I right out of high school. But he was one of the few, and then he helped people get their driver's license, especially if they already knew how to drive. I mean, he wasn't a but he helped people with the translation.
He taught them how to drive too.
He taught them how to drive too. Okay, good.
I can't tell you how many times he would pick me up after school, and I never knew what car was coming to pick me up. And then I would hear the horn honk. This was great, by the way, when you're a teenager. The horn honking of some old, whatever car, and my dad waving for me to come get in the car, and it would be somebody he was driving around with, showing them how to drive the car.
So he taught them how to drive also. My dad knew how to drive. He was a professional driver in Portugal, but he didn't know any of the rules and regulations and all the things that have to be. And he couldn't speak English. And at that time, there was no test in Portuguese at DMV. And so my father was just one of, I would say, hundreds, if not thousands, of people that António Carvalho, especially between, I would say, 65 and 75, helped tremendously. And it was because of radio.
Yeah, the common story that I hear about my father when people find out who I am, which I can kind of hide a little bit, right? But when they find out that I'm a filha do António Carvalho, the common thing I get is, "Oh, your father helped us do our papers to become American citizens."
That too, yeah.
I hear that all the time, and I asked my mom not that long ago. I asked her, I go, "Do you know how many people you guys helped do the papers for?" And she goes, "Thousands." She goes, "It was thousands." She says, they have a file cabinet full of all the different papers that they helped with people becoming American citizens. And she says, "Oh, we've never counted." She goes, now they're starting to shred the stuff.
Sure.
But so if anybody's out there who wants their papers, their original papers, let us know. But a lot of people.
Radio basically was the platform.
That was the vehicle
that your father used to get in touch with people. I mean,
Absolutely.
That's how they knew who António Carvalho was. This was before some of our younger audiences understand the world prior to Facebook and social media, but there was a world, and the radio program was the way for him to not only promote, obviously, what he sold, at that time, cars. He eventually got into insurance, if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, yeah. And
so he could teach them how to drive. He sold them a car, and then he got them the insurance on the car.
And he made them American citizens.
And he made them an American citizen. But the program was also a way for them to get jobs, because people would call and say, "I need a milker, I need a feeder, I need someone to work." And he would let people know, and they'd come by the office, and he'd give them the name and the phone number and the address. And so a lot of people came through looking for work, or then if somebody came through looking for a job and he didn't have any listings, he would call a few people to see if anybody might need someone. So he helped people get jobs too.
Let's go back to the beginning that you have any memory of the going to the Portuguese radio station, if that has, I don't know where he started the program, but I remember him was on KCOK in Tulare. And so I know he had it there for many, many years. And Portugal Terra de Fé was on Sunday afternoon, if I'm not mistaken.
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock, that's right, 2 to 3, right before Mr. and Mrs. Santos.
Yes.
Yes.
And then he would come back to Hanford, and he would do Echoes of the Azores at night, right after Mr. and Mrs. Morrison.
Right. So he began Portugal Terra de Fé in 1964. It was a few years later that he acquired Ecos dos Açores, or Echoes of the Azores, from Mrs. Souza. Yeah, right?
Yes, I don't know the exact date. That was the one thing that nobody seemed to know. My mom didn't even know. But it wasn't.
Yeah,
I want to say it was still in the 60s.
yeah, I
I
was
want to say
thinking
probably
it,
1968.
yeah,
69.
I remember Mrs. Sousa. I remember listening to her
Me too.
when we arrived in 1960, but I think, or 68, but I believe it was shortly after, maybe 69, 70, that your dad acquired, because I think she got ill and she was older already at the time.
Right. And
Um,
her husband also didn't he have a program too? Soldat
Yes,
or something?
yes, yes, yes. So so what are your first memories of going to the radio station as someone born in America, your mom already born in America, your grandmother from your mom's side already born here as well. Living this hour that your dad put forth to the community.
Well, I think the first radio station was KLAN. That
Right,
was the first radio station that he was at. And I don't have a lot of memories, but I have memories of like a trailer kind of thing,
right, yeah.
building. I definitely remember KCOK. And I remember when K-Jug came in, and I wasn't too happy about that because I liked the soft rock and I wasn't too crazy about the country being on the FM channel, because the radio station would have an FM and an AM. And the AM was the Portuguese and the FM was usually os americanos, right? The American
Right.
music. And being younger, we'd want to go hang out and listen to the American music. But I mean, that was my playground.
Hmm.
I mean, every Sunday we would go, and it was
So
an all
you'd
day.
go as a family when you were
Mhm.
younger? Okay.
Yeah, all day. So, and we would find something to do. Sometimes my brother Anthony and I would go explore, around the outside or in the other rooms. We got to be friends with the people that worked there. My father would usually ask us to talk on the radio, so we would say some stuff. There was, I know there was a florist in Hanford. It was Anna's Floral. And I used to do that ad. I used to do the ad when I was a little girl. And I know my father had a hard time with W's. So Williams Jewelers, I remember saying it for him, in the ad, because he wanted to be respectful of the name, and he had a hard time saying it with his accent. But the other thing too is my brother and I, my father would put us on the air. So we did these little comedy skits that he would write, where my brother was the teacher, very serious, and then I would say something kind of smart alecky, and it was a lot of joking and silliness.
Do you still have any of these or no?
No,
I'm sure.
I don't. I wonder if my brother does. He might,
That would
because
be
my father had the reel-to-reel, the old-fashioned. I have some pictures to show you today, but the old tape recorders. And I know that they kept quite a few of those. So,
yeah, because those are historical data. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that was done on the radio, people just did it, and they did it for years, like your father did, and of course, and your brother, and especially the older generation, your father's generation. They never thought of keeping it. It was just something they were doing, and to serve the community. And now it's a lot of historical data that unfortunately we don't have. So it'd be nice to have those skits, but because the
yeah,
Morrisons also did a skit, but we can't
they
find
did.
any of them any longer. So
Yeah, they did the same thing where I think she played the kid,
she
didn't
was
she?
she was a
She was the
teacher.
teacher
It
and
was
he
the
was the
opposite.
kid.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
opposite, yeah.
And the so being involved in not just listening to what your dad did on the radio, but being involved in the radio yourself. Do you how do you feel about that now? I mean, and how do you remember feeling about that then? Because sometimes we as parents want our kids to do something and they end up doing it, but it's not that's not their top priority.
Because it was a part of my life from the very beginning, I never really questioned it. I tell the story in my intercultural communication class that when we'd get in the car, my father always had the Portuguese radio programs on, always. And being a rebellious, young, mouthy girl, I was young though, I would always ask if we could just put on an American radio station to hear music. And my father would do the same thing every single time. He'd be like, you're right, Linda, you're right. And he'd turn it off. He goes, instead we'll pray. And he'd hand me the rosary and he'd say, here, you lead. So I stopped fighting the Portuguese radio very quickly. But it's funny because those songs that he played on the program and that everybody played, Amália Rodrigues and Jorge Ferreira and Chico Avila, and I'm thinking Nilton Cesar and Kim Barrage and Roberto Leal, right? All of these names became sort of a soundtrack for my life. I mean, that music that I listen to it today. And I tell my students that as much as I rebelled against that when I was younger, wanting to be American, to fit in with my American friends who didn't know anything about this Portuguese world, and that's the majority of the music that's on my iPod. It's the music that I still enjoy and listen to and seek out.
Did you recall also some of the festas? Because at one time, I know later on, especially when your brother took over in the 1990s, the festas the Portuguese radio festas, I should say, not the festas itself in California, but the Portuguese radio festas kind of died out because the social calendar got busier, in the Portuguese American community. But in the 1960s and certainly in the 1970s and 80s, the earlier part of the 80s, the Portuguese festas were a big deal of the radio programs, because there was basically just the Festa do Espírito Santo or the Festa de Fátima, and then there was nothing else. There wasn't this large social calendar. And so do you recall some of the festas that Portugal Terra de Fé and that Cruz dos Açores had?
Yeah, my father was actually one of the main members of the Our Lady of Fatima Festa in Leighton, and he was also one of the main members that started Sant Antônio, Festa Sant Antônio in Hanford. But specifically, my father had his own festas,
right,
and a lot of the radio programs did. And it was a celebration for the people who were associados, right? People would pay $1 to belong to the program.
$1 a year.
$1 a year. And you would get, your birthday would be announced and anniversaries, and you could dedicate songs to people. So that was kind of a way to sort of celebrate those people, and so they would gather. And my father would flip-flop it. So one year he would do it in Tulare, and then the next year he would have it in Hanford, and then he'd go back to Tulare. So it went back and forth between the Fraternal Hall and the IDS Hall, right? TDS Hall.
TDS,
TDS Hall. But my father couldn't just have a dance, right? I don't know if you remember these, but my father had acto de variedades. So he had a variety show. And this is one of my favorite memories of the whole radio program thing. He would announce on the radio that if you wanted to be in the variety show, that you could audition. And Denise, people came out of the woodwork and would come to my dad's garage. And it was one of my funnest memories is just watching we had a magician. We had dancers, we had singers, there was accordions and there was mandolins. And I remember even one of my American neighbors who played the cello, and he liked jazz music and knew nothing about Portuguese other than his neighbors were Portuguese. He'd come down with his cello just so he could play with them. And they would practice. They would have these dance practices, kind of like the São Joaninas, how they dance in the road.
Right.
They would choreograph them and do them in our garage, in our front driveway. And then, of course, for the festa, they would have a show. And at the end of the show, everybody would move the chairs back, and then they'd have a dance.
So he did both. Interesting.
He did both. And my grandmother bought a Hobart mixer, the big industrial mixer, and made sweetbread for everybody. So there was coffee and sweetbread for everybody for free. And but yeah, some of those shows, as a matter of fact, Emily Ponch, who sings, she told me the other day that she started dancing and singing in my dad's shows in the garage. Interesting.
So and that's one aspect that I wanted to ask, because although the radio was, of course, done at the radio station. He always had his program at the radio station, whether it be KCOK or KNGS before it was KIGS in Hanford. But I recall the early parts of his career as a radio personality, but also as someone in business, whether it be in the car industry or insurance, et cetera. Documents that he did, as you mentioned, for citizenship papers and everything else. I recall at the first time before he had the Carvalho Insurance Agency and the office, he had it in his house. So it was kind of, you had everybody going into your home. How did you feel as a young kid having people just come into I know it was a separate area, but still it was part of your home.
It was part of the house. And people would come anytime. I mean, it wasn't like you had hours. So I remember people coming on Thanksgiving, just showing up. My favorite story was a woman who came and to my dad's office at our house. And she had a jacket on, and she's sitting waiting her turn because there was somebody ahead of her. And so my mom's taking care of the other lady, and then finally they get to her turn and they ask her if they can help her. And she said she wanted to pay my dad for the work that he had done. And she opens up her jacket and she's got 2 live chickens in her jacket that she brought. And my mom was like, oh my God, we live in the city. We can't have chickens. So she called her dad to come and take them out to the country at their house. I'm sure they became chickens. But so people would come, and that was a very common thing. Our home was a typical Portuguese home, people in and out all the time. The backyard, my father had a chalkboard in the patio. Underneath Molotava that had grapevines.
Mm-hmm.
And he would teach people basic sentences so that they could pass their American citizenship. Our home was just part of the whole package.
And this happened all the way until you were in your teens and probably until you were an adult.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it did. And then when he got the office, I think he got the office just so they could have a little bit of separation.
Sure.
Because my mom used to, she says it all the time, that they couldn't go to a festa. Because if they went to a festa, everybody wanted to ask him something. They couldn't dance or, just be an ordinary couple. I tell my students, when I talk about my father and some of my stories in my communication classrooms, that my father was, I used to say the Dick Clark of the Portuguese community, but now nobody knows who that is.
That's right. You have to
be
change.
Like Ryan Seacrest, who do you know?
Yeah.
But he was the master of ceremonies at a lot of weddings. He did a lot of eulogies at funerals. He was just somebody that people called on and relied on. And
it's something totally different today than radio. So, and I'm glad you mentioned that in the beginning, because sometimes people have this notion of a radio DJ, even, Dick Clark, who presented, all of the, the top 40s, but it's this person that does this, but radio personalities of the time, of the 70s and 80s, and I think that's the strongest part when we had Portuguese radio. It kind of started dying out in the 90s because then, of course, we had the so-called professional radio DJs that came from Portugal and things like that change, and the independent radio programs. It's good to explain to people that Linda's dad, like everyone that did radio at the time, they purchased their time, and then they sold ads, and of course, tried to make at least to pay the bills, and so it was totally different because it wasn't so much a job that you went to. It was kind of a calling. I mean, you had contact with these people. You were part of their family. You were invited to their matanças, and you were invited to their weddings, as you said, and your father was the MC, and you were invited to sometimes their baptisms and things like that. And do you have memories of that as a young child, that all of these things, that it was kind of a social thing that you had to go to? It was kind of expected that António Carvalho would be present.
Absolutely. And when we got older and we could drive, I remember one particular weekend that my father had 4 weddings and he couldn't go to all 4. So he was the master of ceremonies at one of them. And I know I went to one wedding and my brother went to the other wedding. I don't remember what happened to the 4th one, but just to be a representative, at least to go and let the family know that we cared. My father also, when he would take his vacations, when we'd go to the Azores, behind me here, feeling so bad.
That's right.
Because I can't go this year, but we would go to the Azores and my father would interview people in the Azores and record them on the reel to reel, and then bring it back so he could play it during the shows. And so, I mean, everything was connected.
Yeah, and he actually had he actually was one of the very first Portuguese people that I know that had a video recorder. I mean, not not even a camcorder like people would say. It was one of those old small video recorders. And the reason I know that is because I have here at home one of his tapes, because when we went to 1972. We arrived in 68, and my dad decided to go back in 72 to pay a promesa. And your mom and dad went there. We were there for a long time. And
you guys had a croissant.
Yes.
Okay, my mom has pictures.
Yes, and we
should have brought the pictures for this.
I have the video. I haven't actually, in the original format. I still haven't transferred it over to digital. In the original format that he recorded the procession and the croissant and all the things. He was at the festa there for a couple of days. My dad had and him had a good relationship, and my dad appreciated him a lot, and the rest of us did as well. And so. So this was also a way to connect, because 1972 or even the mid and late 70s, it's not like people went to the Azores such as like you do and others every year. A lot of people did not. We went at the end of 4 years kind of as an anomaly, because it was my father wanted to pay that promesa because he didn't want anything to happen and have that in his conscience, whatever. But most people didn't go back for like 10 or 12 years. And so when these radio personalities were able to go there, I'm sure that it was a lot of, it was important for his radio program where he brought back.
And he would go around the island and record and interview people that were related to the people here, so that they could hear their voices or see them. And he would have loved the technology today. He would have loved this. The fact that you can actually, as a matter of fact, just before this call, I was on a video call with the Azores. So the fact that you could connect so easily to see the people, I think that was one of the things that really drove Portuguese radio, was to keep that connection. To stay connected to the things that you remembered, or the things that they would tell stories. My father would always tell jokes. He would do adivinhas, little riddles.
Mm-hmm.
And people just really, I think that's what they really liked about the program, was that it wasn't just music. There was a connection to their culture.
And one of the things that your dad is famous for, among others, that we just mentioned a lot throughout the last half hour, but one of the things that Portugal, Terra de Fé, and os Açores were famous for, especially, I recall vividly, I would say certainly throughout the radio programs that I listened, but in the late 70s and throughout the 80s, was the subscrições, and that's a Portuguese word for collection of money to help, usually to help rebuild a church, or to help a charity home or an orphanage in the Azores, in one of the islands. It was always tied to the Azores. It was always, and a lot of times to Terceira, obviously, because he was from there. But there were also, also peditórios or subscrições, these radiothons, for lack of a better word now, that also went to other islands, São Jorge and Pico and Faial and everything else. And he kind of did them. He did like, 9, 10, 11 of them, even more than that, every single year. And it became, his program was known for that, to help all these different events. And I just can imagine the bookkeeping of all that, but I'm sure your mom played a role in that.
My mother did. And I remember being at the radio station, because, there would be more than one line. And so people could call in, and I answered the phone too, and we would take down their name and how much they were willing to donate. My father was a very firm believer that even if you don't think you have a great life, there are people that have it worse than you. And so a very strong emphasis on giving back. Mm-hmm. And so those those petitions and getting people to donate for various causes. And I have a photo I'll show you of one of the first ones he did. That was just part of the way that he believed, you know, you give back, you give back. And there was a lot of bookkeeping. We had these spiral notebooks. I remember Kutelping even coming and helping. We had different people that would come to the station when he would do these, and we would answer the phone and write down who it was, and then we'd go take him a slip of paper so he could announce on the radio who was donating. So there was like this live interaction going on. But yeah, those were common.
And what people probably don't know is, I mean, in 1 hour, because this program, Portugal Terra de Fé, was from 2 to 3, as you mentioned, he would literally get hundreds of phone calls.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't you know, he'd get 15 or 20 phone calls. It was literally hundreds of phone calls in 1 hour. So, you know, it was it was a different time in radio, but it was a different time in, I think they even were a little bit more people oriented than even the traditional radio in America was, because we know that radio is different, obviously, from the 1970s to today, you know, 50 years later. But the Portuguese radio personalities, such as your father, were kind of someone's relative. Is that a good way to describe it?
Absolutely. I'm sure there were a lot of people that you know, it was always Senhor António, Senhor Elvira, but it was very much, I think people felt that they knew them. You know, they were a part of their family.
And that's why they went to your home at Thanksgiving. If
I don't think Thanksgiving was considered a holiday. People say it was just, and then what do? You're like, you know, come on in.
Sure. Let me ask you one question that how do you feel, or and I know that you know, your mom lives close to you. How did she feel about all this, being someone that was born and raised in the United States of America, her own parents or mom born here? I mean, she was already by nature, you know, more American than Portuguese until she met your father, obviously. But
you know, her father didn't speak English.
Okay, so she spoke English, she spoke Portuguese, obviously. But how did she feel about this whole? Because I mean, her life had to change tremendously as well.
And my mom's she's not, my father was outgoing. He was an extrovert. And my mom isn't. She's a little bit more introverted. Although she has definitely come out of her shell and become more more extroverted. But so this was a lot of attention that was not, it was super comfortable for my dad, but not as comfortable for her. And I think that she sometimes felt that, you know, this took up a lot of their time. You know, we went every Sunday, you know, we were all day because you had the afternoon program, you had the night program. So our Sundays were booked. Saturdays were weddings and festas and parties and whatever we had to go to. So it took up a lot of their life. And then, of course, the program was at home. I mean, the office was at home, and my mom was his secretary. She helped with everything. I think there's a lot of it that gave her a lot of joy, and she certainly met a lot of wonderful people. But I think sometimes she wanted it a little bit quieter.
Sure. And how did it feel for you and Anthony, you and your brother, being raised in Hanford, small community, still a small town, but very much smaller then, you know? And how did it feel for you? How do you recall being basically the daughter, and in your case, the daughter, in his case, the son of a Portuguese icon? Were you aware of that?
We definitely were aware, because it was very hard to get away from that. You know, our identity was, you know, a fila do António Carvalho. That's how people knew us, you know, is by being called his daughter, his son.
That's still, by the way, how people know you, because I told my mom that I was going to have a conversation with Linda Carvalho Cooley, and she turned to me and says, "A filha do António Carvalho?" That's how you still know.
That's how I'm known, and so we were very aware of the fact that our father was a sort of a public figure in the Portuguese community. In the American community, no, right? But in the Portuguese community, everybody knew who he was, and you know, like I said, it was from the get-go, right? So we were used to it our whole life. In our American life, and I don't want to speak for my brother, but for me, I know I was, I tried really hard to, I'm going to use the term white privilege. I would hide and blend in with my American girlfriends, but they would talk about going to football games and various things that just were not a part of my world, right? that I remember not really wanting them to know everything, or then assuming that they did know and then finding out. Like my best friend, I remember her telling me, we don't do that. And I'd be like, oh, okay, so this is something that's cultural.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of nice because when I teach, I'm able to bring up those moments when you realize that what you do isn't what everybody else does, and that's the cultural part of it.
Sure.
But I think we were just used to it.
And he was, even in the American community, he became a very well-known figure in Hanford. I mean, even those who weren't Portuguese knew who he was because his name was, of course, because it was a businessman as well, and he was a very successful businessman.
Those relationships always surprised me.
Okay.
Like the American people that would be, because you expect Portuguese people to become friends with him, but I would wonder, like, how would Americans handle his, because how Portuguese people are. We're loud and we're pushy and we're incredibly loyal and all of those things. There's goods and bads in all of them, right? But
sure.
I always wondered how, and he'd become really good friends with some purely Americanized people, and I was like, how does this work? I mean, I get how Portuguese people, how it works, but how does this work? But he had a way of connecting with people from different areas.
Yeah, I've always wondered why he never ran for political office, because I think he would have been a natural politician.
Oh, God. Somebody did.
So you have some pictures to show us, I hope, that we can talk a little bit about them as well.
Okay, so
it'd be great to talk and look at these memories, because that's one thing that we have, these memories, but we don't have a lot of visual images.
Oh, it says that I can't share the screen.
Okay.
You have to allow me to share the screen.
And oh my, I don't see a button here for that, but
at the bottom,
where
it says share screen, does it have an arrow or anything to the right?
It sure does. And here we are, multiple participants. I think you should be able to do it. We're having a class on Zoom at the same time.
How to do Zoom.
Because Professor Linda Carvalho Cooley knows all about this.
Okay, so let's see. Can you see that?
Oh, we can, correct? Yes.
Okay, so this was one of the first fundraisers that he did, and it was actually for an earthquake in Saint George, and it was like in 1960, it might have been 64 or 65.
It probably was. There was an earthquake at that time. Yes, there was.
And in the picture, you see my dad is in the front, but behind him is Joaquin Morrison and Amelia Morrison. And to Amelia Morrison's left, that is Mary Souza and Arthur Souza, her husband. And what they did was the Portuguese radio programs all did this together, where they raised money and clothing and blankets and whatever they needed for that relief effort. That was a really bad earthquake, and apparently a lot of people ended up going to Terceira. So they sent it, the Air Force got involved, and actually they airlifted all the packages to go to Terceira, because of course there's an American Air Force base there. So that was one of them. So of course I was hoping we were going to bring up the fact that he did a lot to raise money, but this was probably one of the first ones. I wanted to show this because
that's a wonderful picture.
And of course you can see the reel-to-reel that he had. I think this isn't the same one, but my brother still has one of his. And this was at home. This was them recording. They would record birthdays and different things at home, so it would be set up so he could take phone calls during the program, because sometimes people wanted to talk to him, and so he would put the reel on.
So he actually would do pre-recording, which is kind of a novelty because a lot of people did not. They would do everything live.
Right.
But he actually did the pre-recording, probably, as you said, because he wanted to talk to different people who would be calling in.
Yeah, a lot of times people would call and want to talk to him, so he would record the birthdays ahead of time, because then he could play those or the advertisements. And this was way back before they had it, where you could queue up the different ads. And this is my parents at one of their first festas, because they would have their festas. So this was at the fraternal hall. And
it's wonderful to note that they were very, very nicely dressed. I mean, people think a festa of the radio programs, especially in the 1970s and 60s as well, but 60s and 70s was kind of like a prom.
It was. people definitely got dressed up. And my dad apparently loved the white tuxedo. We used to joke about the white tuxedo for many years. But these are two of my favorite pictures of my dad. This is iconic António Carvalho at the radio. And I just want to point out the cool microphone. I see you have your green screen behind you has a bunch of microphones, but the old-fashioned microphone.
Right.
And then the picture where you can see behind him, I don't know if you can see, there's a dial-up phone right back here. That's like an antique phone in the radio station.
Wow, what a wonderful picture. Oh, this is wonderful.
Yeah, this is Portugal Terra da Fé. This would be also at the Fraternal Hall, this one. And this gentleman here was from the Lavandeiras, the Lavandera family from Tulare. And I think he had a brother that used to play background music for various things.
and actually playing the guitar there on my right is Mr. Lambandeira.
Yeah.
The Portuguese style guitar on my right, or
yes, that's Mr. Lambandeira over here.
That's Mr. Lambandeira, yes, who is an icon here, who is, I believe, from the same freguesia area as your father was, the Ribeirinha Santo Amaro area. Yes.
Ribeirinha, right. And I want to point out too, like the costumes that you see. This is all stuff that the women, my mom and some other women, would make costumes for the different variety show acts. Let's see. I've got this one here. So this one, the photo on the left, you can see that it has the KLAN, which was the original radio station for Portugal Terra da Fé. And then the photo on the right, see, notice my dad is in the white tuxedo every single time. Tuxedo.
You're right. I didn't know he had a fascination for those, but he does like them.
Apparently like the white look. But the photo on the right-hand side, you can see it's a young girl. She's getting the accordion, so she's going to play the accordion. Again, these were all people that tried out and wanted to be on the show.
And it seems like they're one of the one who's with the KLAN. There's a recorder there, so it seems like he would record these to also play on his radio program in other episodes.
Yes, he did. He would play them back for people, little excerpts here and there. I don't know if you know Fatima Silveira. Joe and Fatima Silveira. Yes. That's her on the left-hand side. She was one of our very common featured singers for the program. And that's me and my brother in the front row. Doing
wonderful.
The little marches. And then the people behind, that was part of the thing that looks very similar to like a São Joaninas, where they would crisscross, almost like a square dance kind of choreograph.
Sure.
And then on the right-hand side, I think you know Father Costa.
Father Costa was passed on, yes.
Yes.
He's an icon also,
Also an icon, right?
Yes.
This is the Albernazz Sisters. I don't know if you ever remember them.
I do.
I believe they came from either the Bay Area or the San Jose area.
From the Bay Area, correct? Yeah. Yeah.
And they would come and perform at our variety show. So it wasn't just the central San Joaquin Valley. I mean, there were people that heard about it and wanted to participate and come down. And I remember them really well. They came several times.
And it's always amazing that every single one of these pictures, just about there is a reel to reel. So he was conscious that he wanted to play this back, because not everybody could go to the festa. Some people couldn't go. I mean, he had thousands and thousands of listeners, and the festa may have 400 or 500 people. So
right.
Yeah.
And this one you can tell is in Tulare, as was the one.
That's this is TDS for sure. Yes.
TDS Hall, right? We recognize the iconic look.
Yeah.
This was before one of their festas. We're just all dressed up, getting ready to go. This is the office that was in our house, where we took these photos. And here's one of my dad again. Now this would be in the office that we had at our home. This was once we had moved to this other house. He was still recording things there. And this one I thought I'd throw in just for fun. I'm assuming you'll know who this is. Do you know who the gentleman is in the tan suit?
I'm trying to see who it is.
That is Eduardo Paim.
Eduardo Paim, yes, and his wife, yes.
And his wife, Clotilde.
Yes, Clotilde,
and
yes.
They had Amor de Patria, was
That's
their
right.
radio program.
Correct.
And on the right-hand side, it just showing the three different soccer jerseys, because another thing that the Portuguese people would gather to do on Saturdays, because Sunday, of course, was all the radio programs, they would go and play soccer. And so in the sporting outfit is Eduardo Paim, and in Benfica is my father.
I see that.
That's Edwin Martins in the middle. He didn't have a program or anything. He was just a friend.
Did he play soccer? So your dad played soccer a little bit?
Yeah, he did.
Okay.
And I'll end with this one. I believe this was
Oh,
a staged photo, but this is me and my brother. And this was at KCOK. We would sit with the microphones and we would do our little comedy skits. But I believe this one we staged it for the picture, but we took a picture.
and so he would. These were written by your father, basically.
My father would write them, and we would practice them, and he would tell us, no, you got to be funnier at this part. You know, pause here. He taught us to read and write in Portuguese. So
Interesting. I was going to ask that. So was your first language Portuguese? You remember that, and your brother?
yes.
Pretty much. Did you, at what point do you remember maybe switching to English? Because of course your mom knew English because she was born here and she knew English and went to school here. Do you remember at what point the English came in? Was it after school when school began, kindergarten, first grade?
We did both.
Okay.
Pretty much all the way through, but my father had a saying, you know, that if se fala em português, responda em português. Se fala em inglês, falas em English. So if he spoke to us in Portuguese, we had to reply in Portuguese, translating for the English-speaking audience. But if he spoke to us in English, then we could respond in English. And you know, that to this day, if somebody speaks to me in Portuguese, I have to respond in Portuguese. And if they flip to English, then I flip to English with them. So we both just, it was just part of, and my dad really wanted us to speak and read and write in Portuguese. So he got us the books and he taught us to do it. And if we couldn't say something, he had a chalkboard behind the couch and he'd bring it out and he would write it. And I mean, I still struggle. I definitely wish I would have continued further than high school with my Portuguese, but I try.
Did you, you try and you do well. Did you, when your brother took over I believe you said 1995,
1995.
did you ever continue doing some programs with him or not really at that time?
No,
At that time you were enforced by your father, quote unquote.
It's funny because if somebody would have said that one day one of your kids is going to take over the program, my brother is a lot quieter. I'm the outgoing one.
Yeah,
I'm the extrovert. He's the introvert, right? But so I think people would have been surprised that it would have been him and not me. The funny thing is that of course I went in and I got my master's in communication and I teach public speaking. And so I guess, you know, the apple still doesn't fall far from the tree. We've all sort of embraced this idea of communication in our own way. But Anthony took on the radio program and I was really proud that he was willing to do it. It certainly was a commitment.
Sure, it was, yeah. And he did it for so many years, 17 years. I didn't know it had been that long until the end of KIGS, basically, until they closed the station. As we end our talk, and I thank you so much for taking time. I know that we're all busy with preparing for what's going to happen next semester, but do you think in any way, shape, or form that your father being this communication person that he was, you know, an outgoing and basically radio and communicating with people was what made him successful in America? Did that influence you into going into communications as a professor?
It absolutely did, and it wasn't something that was conscious. It was becoming I was a business major, and I had a meeting with a counselor, and we had a discussion about things that I enjoy, and I realized the things that I enjoyed were all communicative, and it just happened. And it's weird because now that of course this is what I do, and I've been teaching for a long time, went on to get my doctorate and everything, but I look back on it and I realized that a lot of it had to do with, it was never scary to be in front of people, to talk in front of people. And my father he'd mess up. He'd tell a joke and he'd mess up the joke and he'd laugh about it and people would laugh about it. And he just kept going. And I think that resilience just became part of when I'm teaching and I mess up, I'm like, oh, well, you know, and I tell students, I'm like, don't worry about being perfect, just get your message out. So it definitely had an impact on who I became. And I'm sure it definitely had an impact on who my brother became.
Sure. And one of the things that we, of course, when these conversations we're having about using, as a pretext, the Centennial of Portuguese Radio in California, is that Portuguese radio basically, if the community is what the community is today, if we have the Festa de Santo António and Our Lady of Fatima, Espírito Santo has been here longer, basically, but if we have some of these newer organizations, the Portuguese marching bands and the folklore groups and everything else, we kind of owe it to the pioneers, and not just the pioneers of the 1920s and 30s, but the second wave of pioneers, those who began in the late 50s and 60s, such as António Carvalho. Did you think your dad ever had any thought that what he was doing would have an influence 30, 40 years later?
I'm not sure, but I do know that most people that immigrated, there's two sets of immigrants, right? There's the set of immigrants that very much wanted to become Americans and to, in a way, change who they were and what their future would be. And then there were the immigrants who, although they wanted a new life and a better life, they still wanted to hold on to some of the culture and the traditions because they were values, right? They're inset values that we hold on to. And there's nothing wrong with either one of those. I mean, sure. Some people very much became Americanized and have nothing to do with festas or radio programs or the music or anything. And that's fine. That was the life that they chose. But then there was this contingency of people like my dad, that very deep pride in where they came from and the rituals that they wanted to keep for their children and for their grandchildren. And if you came out of that vein, and I know that all of the, Joaquin Morrison and I just lost her name. I was thinking of another one, Lucia Noya.
Right.
All of those people had that pride. And not to the point of wanting to deny being American. That wasn't the point. The point was to remember where you came from and to remember what was good about it and for it to be okay to celebrate that. I don't know that all of them knew the impact. I think they were trying to make an impact at that time. But I'm so glad they did, because I think that younger people today who have embraced it and who have joined the marching bands and done the queens, in the festas, all of those things, I think those are memories that they're going to have for the rest of their lives.
Indeed, and we are all here on the shoulders of someone, as it's been said, by wiser people than myself. And if today we have the marching bands and we have the folklore groups, folklore, for example, is because António Carvalho did these skits on his radio festas that allowed these people the opportunity to keep these traditions. Had they not had the opportunity, in this case, once a year, twice a year, to come out and to do these radio skits, these skits not on radio, but as a celebration of the radio program on a Portuguese hall, then all of this culture would have died. And that's why I think people sometimes don't have a complete comprehension about it. Is the 1960s and 70s and even 80s were a much different time than in 2020, or obviously 2020 is very different than all years. But
example, that one's really bad.
Isn't it? But much different than the last, than the late 80s and certainly the 90s and the 2000s. And so, if the radio programs, if there were no António Carvalhos of the world, and there weren't that many, I mean, there were maybe, to many people, maybe a lot, but the radio programs were, as you said, Linda, on Saturday and Sunday. And so actually the only radio program that was during the week for a long time was Casey Santos, that had a half-hour show. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Pisca Pisca. And then Lucia Noya had one also half-hour in the morning. But everybody else, they had lives and they had things that they were business people, as your father was, and so it was, then their weekends were all dedicated to this. And so if it weren't for these radio programs that kept the language alive and that kept the music, that brought us the music that some of us, it wasn't us, but our fathers were born with and knew about it, and gave the opportunity for people to go on stage and dance and show their talent, then all of this wouldn't have been channeled anywhere, and we would have just mainstreamed into whatever culture was here at the time, whether it be strong Italian or any other, ethnicity or American, a mixture of all, and we wouldn't have what we have today. So I'm a firm believer that the radio programs of the 60s and 70s, when the exodus of immigration was coming from the Azores to the United States, from 1960 to, from the Capelinhos volcano. And then when that kind of died out in the 62, 63, the Family Reunification Act of 64. And so if it wasn't for those, that immigration would have came. If we didn't have these radio programs, then we wouldn't be the same. I mean, the community is what it is today because of the radio programs of the 60s and 70s and 80s.
And and now we can YouTube, right? You can YouTube any song, any singer. But back then, I remember when we went to Lisbon, my father went shopping for records.
Yeah.
And we did get to see Amália Rodrigues actually sing, and we saw Tony the Much sing, and Kimba Hage. But he bought a bunch of records, and this is music that we probably wouldn't have heard in the Central Valley if he hadn't brought it back.
Sure.
And I think that that's what encourages some of the younger singers to pursue this and to keep that music, those cultures alive.
Correct. And let me ask you one final question. As far as when you mentioned going back to Portugal, going to the Azores, I know that he went quite frequently for that time. Nowadays people go, once the transportation is different and opportunities are different. But even in the 1970s, he went quite often. And how important was that for you and your brother? But obviously, speaking on your behalf, how important was that to maintain the connection that today, you have a home there and you like the islands?
Oh, I tell people all the time the best gift my father gave me was the Portuguese language. The second one was definitely him insisting on us going every year. And as a young American, there were things that I missed. My friends here would go to Disneyland or the beach, and I was going to an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that didn't have soda or television for many, many years. It was like going back in time. But I obviously have a very strong bond with the Azorean Islands. I do have a home there now. I love the island. I mean, it is absolutely a wonderful gift.
And it feels like home because of this insistence from your father.
Absolutely feels like home. My house is 5 minutes from my grandmother's house where I used to play. And and I'm totally at home there. And the weird thing is my husband, who is totally American, and my husband,
yes,
he loves it. Absolutely loves it. It's just a beautiful, wonderful place. And back in the 60s, when all that massive immigration was happening, it's not the same Azores. When the president of the Azores came and spoke at Fresno State, he said that it's not the same Azores that it was when people were immigrating out. It's always been a beautiful country, but it's a beautiful country that also has all of the comforts of home, and it's just very peaceful, and it's part of my heart. So
that's right. Well, Linda, thank you so much. Again, my congratulations to you, and a big thanks to your father up in heaven for all that he did for the Portuguese community. He was an icon. He continues to be an icon. We need to share his story and write his story because these folks were so important in the 1960s and 70s to build the basis for the community that we have today. And António Carvalho is definitely, out of all the names, one of the true icons. I don't think there's anybody of my mother's generation who doesn't know António Carvalho, and my generation as well, because we were raised listening to António Carvalho every single Sunday. So thank you so much.
Can I tell you one more little quick story?
Please do.
So when my father was in the hospital, I took an iPod. This was not long before he passed away. I took an iPod and I was playing Portuguese music for him, just to calm him down. And a nurse walked in and she was like, "Oh my God." She goes, "Senor António," and she held his hand. And she says, "I'm going to tell my grandmother that I was holding Senor António Carvalho's hand and we were listening to Amália Rodrigues." And it was just one of those really sweet moments that she just remembered being a little girl at her grandmother's house listening to his program. So
That's
memories, right?
That's a wonderful note to end on. I can't do any better than that. Thank you so much. That's again to all of you, Dr. Linda Carvalho Cooley, who is a communications professor at Reedley College and communication lecturer as well at California State University, Fresno. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you all. And we will continue these conversations every Thursday. Thank you, Linda. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.